thank you for joining this call on President Obama's imminent trip to Asia. You'll be hearing from Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, Congressman Louise Slaughter of New York, and we'll be joined by Congressman Keith Ellison of Minnesota, as well as Clyde Prestowitz, who many of you know from his role as a U.S. trade negotiator during the Reagan administration in Korea, in Japan, in China, and also now is the president of the Economic Strategy Institute. His most recent book is The Betrayal of American Prosperity. So I am honored to introduce Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro to start our call. Congresswoman.
Thanks so much, Lori, and hello to everyone. Thanks for being on the call. I want to also thank and acknowledge Clyde Prestowitz for contributing his insights and expertise on such an important topic. And to my colleague and friend Louise Slaughter, and we're going to be joined by my colleague Keith Ellison, both of whom have been champions on these issues. So I'm pleased to join with them today. On the eve of the president's visit to Japan, what we're looking at and what we're seeing are some new arguments playing out in the debate that I think are worth unpacking. First, many of the supporters of this 12-nation free trade deal are now arguing that its fate rests on successful bilateral trade talks between President Obama and Prime Minister Abe. As the conventional wisdom goes, if Japan and the United States can sort out market access issues for agriculture, automobiles, then this massive trade deal can at last be concluded. This is not really the case. What the argument obscures is the fact that TPP negotiators are grappling with many seemingly intractable problems. It is a bit odd for the president to push for TPP in Japan when he's not gotten fast-track negotiating authority from the Congress. But either way, the issues being worked out with Japan are just one set of obstacles. A couple of examples: intellectual property concerns threaten to limit access to affordable medicines are also derailing the TPP agreement. And for every issue that's being intently discussed, there are others. Currency manipulation, being swept under the rug, and which argue strongly against the passage of any such trade deal. Foremost among these is the impact, in my view, devastating impact a TPP agreement would have on jobs and the American middle class. Look, we know how this plays out for American workers. We saw it with NAFTA, and we saw it with Korea. 20 years ago, we were promised NAFTA would bring an unprecedented economic boom, 200,000 jobs in the first year alone. 2 decades later, we know how it's played out. 1993, before NAFTA, the U.S. had a $2.5 billion trade surplus with Mexico, a $29 billion deficit with Canada. By 2012, that exploded into a combined NAFTA trade deficit of $181 billion. Also, since NAFTA, 845,000 U.S. workers in the manufacturing sector lost jobs due to imports from Canada and Mexico, or the relocation of those factories to those countries. Another example, more recent, is the trade agreement with Korea, which passed in 2012. President Obama said it would support, and I quote, 70,000 American jobs from increased goods exports alone. What's the reality? U.S. exports to Korea fell 10% in the PAC's first year. U.S. trade deficit with Korea exploded, leading to about a net loss of tens of thousands of American jobs in the first year. The data's in. It's irrefutable. We know the impact this trade deal will have on jobs, and we have seen this movie several times before. Which is one of the reasons why I believe what we're beginning to hear now is a lot more in the way of foreign policy, national security arguments in support of the trade deal. Now both implicitly and explicitly argued by Vice President Biden and others that the TPP is needed to counter the growing influence of China in the region. Let's just be clear. We heard these same arguments that were attached to NAFTA and to Korea. We needed NAFTA to bolster Mexico, prevent mass migration to the United States, and yet we still have serious immigration issues. CAFTA and Colombia were needed to hedge against Venezuela, bolster our stature in Latin America. The South Korea agreement to strengthen our alliance vis-a-vis North Korea. Our security alliance with countries like Japan, in my view, is strong enough without TPP, and TPP partners do not see this agreement as a means to counter China. The primary issue here is not security. It is that TPP would force Americans to compete against workers from nations such as Vietnam, where the minimum wage is $2.75 per day. It threatens to roll back financial regulation, environmental standards, and U.S. laws that protect the safety of drugs and food and the toys that we give to our kids. It creates binding policies in countless areas so that the Congress and state legislatures would be thwarted from mitigating the PAC's damage in the future. All indications are the impact from TPP on American workers and middle class will be profoundly negative. So now we hear, as I said, that we have, must happen for foreign policy reasons, national security reasons, to preserve our presence in the region, to act as a bulwark or counterweight against China. The arguments don't wash. Especially consider that the door's been left open for China to join. There's lots of ways, positive ways, in which we can enhance our competitiveness with China in the global economy. We need to invest in our own infrastructure, in manufacturing, and in job training. We need to address issues like currency manipulation, the use of state-owned enterprises, and the need for global labor protections. We can enter trade deals that are mutually beneficial. We can grow exports while doing the right thing by our workers and what our priorities and what our economic goals are as a nation. You have nearly two-thirds of Americans today opposing the granting of fast-track authority to the president for this deal. Last year, 178 House members, both parties, publicly declared their opposition to it. The opposition to fast-track is not because we are anti-trade, nor do we have any unfriendly feelings toward our allies in Asia. It is because Congress has always had an important constitutional oversight role to play in trade matters, and we believe that we should not blindly endorse any more NAFTA-style deals negotiated behind closed doors, which sell out our workers, offshore our manufacturing, and depress our wages further and depress benefits further. So I'm so proud to join this call today, and I thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. It's my honor to now introduce Congresswoman Louise Slaughter from New York, the ranking member of the Rules Committee. Congresswoman.
Thank you, Laurie, and thanks for everybody for being on this call, because it is terribly important. In the years that I've been in Congress, I have yet to see any trade agreement that benefited in almost any way either the American producer or the American worker. Indeed, I represent part of Western New York, which has been so decimated by NAFTA that we're just now starting with some new innovative manufacturing, new ideas to reclaim some of our economy. This is no time at all, in my opinion, for the United States to enter into another gigantic trade agreement, which will do nothing more except damage our own economy. It is really shameful, in my opinion, that the United States of America has let itself be led into doing the same kind of trade agreements over and over again. Fast Track was started in the 70s as a way to give the administration an opportunity to negotiate trade bills. Congress only rubber stamped what they did. What Fast Track does is takes Congress out of any trade agreement. So we are totally unable to represent our constituencies, our region, or our government. Now, under this trade agreement, President Obama could agree to sign, and all we would get would be 90 days to vote up or down. No amendments, no changes. Now, as this negotiation has gone on, I've been particularly concerned about wool and wool tariffs, because I represent one of the last men's manufacturers of suits in the United States, Hickey Freeman. And we were very much worried because all we kept hearing rumors was that Vietnam was going to get such wool advantages that it could destroy that major corporation in our country. I was allowed to see a couple of spreadsheets from discussing jackets and war all day, but telling me nothing. And the two young women who came over from the Trade Representative's office couldn't tell me anything. I couldn't have my own staff with me. I had a staff member from the Ways and Means Committee, who, as I understand, since joined over at the trade negotiations. So, when I say we have been shut out, we have been shut out. The rumors that I have been hearing is that the financial services and pharmaceuticals in the United States are really running this whole operation, and that they will be making out like bandits. But we don't know. But what I do know for sure is that I think if we stop fast track, that brings Congress back into it. And I'm glad what Rose had said, and let me echo that. We are not against trade. But we've never had fair trade. We rebuilt all those countries, as I said, Germany, Japan, South Korea, with our military contracts, so their economy is good. And in the case of Korea, if anybody should attack them, we have to go and fight for them. I really want my country to grow up. I really want people to understand what has happened here and really look at the figures. Drive through some of the towns in western New York where everything is boarded up, where people who used to have good jobs at good wages. Eastman Kodak, let me give that for an example. When I first went to Congress, we had 69,000 people working in Rochester for Eastman Kodak. Now it's down less to 4,000, and they have been through bankruptcy. These are the things that we're concerned about and the things that we're worried about. If we stop fast track, then we don't have a trade agreement shoved down on us that we have no possibility of talking about. It's totally un-American. The Constitution gives trade agreement rights to the Congress of the United States. We're simply trying to reclaim that. I'm so happy to be here this morning and so happy to have the interest that you have displayed by being here with us. And certainly a great welcome to Clyde. I can't wait to read your book. I'm going out this afternoon to get it.
Okay.
Thank you, Clyde. You have seen the light. I love that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's now my honor to introduce Congressman Keith Ellison from Minnesota. Congressman?
Well, hey, thank you, everybody on the call. It was a pleasure to hear Congressman Slaughter and DeLauro talk about this key issue. They have already hit on the key points that I have, so I'm not going to belabor. But I do want to make a few points before we move forward. I would encourage anybody, any journalist on the call, to look at U.S. trade deficits over time since NAFTA. What you will see is just growing trade deficits, which result directly in the loss of U.S. jobs. And when asked how we're going to address trade deficits, many of the proponents of the TPP don't have much to say. I mean, the bottom line is, we have trade deficits with more than half of the countries that's supposed to be signatories to this agreement. If that's true, what is in this agreement that's going to reverse that trend? Nothing that I could see. At the end of the day, the people who are proposing this TPP have yet to answer how they're going to address our trade deficit problem, how they're going to address the opacity problem, because we cannot see this document. Luis Slaughter is absolutely right. When we say we can't see it, the USTR reps will go in and show you a few pages, which will be difficult to understand. Your staff can't participate, and then they leave. But you're no better off. But yet they get to say, "Oh, you saw it." We didn't really see it, not in anything as a meaningful way. And so at the end of the day, we cannot support Trade Promotion Authority. We cannot support it because our job is to look after the public interest, not the private gain of certain multinational corporations. Our job is to look out after the people who we represent, who are small business people, who are people who are workers, who are people who need access to affordable drugs. Our job is to look after those folks. And so we cannot, I cannot support this, and I cannot, and I would not urge my colleagues to support it. And I think if anyone wants to make the claim that somehow the TPP is going to be a great thing for the United States, we need to start talking apples to apples. How is this going to affect jobs? Manufacturing jobs, jobs in the garment industry. How is this going to affect drug prices? How is this going to affect the key issues that our people depend upon every single day? And so far I haven't gotten any answers, and I'm growing more suspicious by the moment as time goes by, and we continue to get no answers. Because if they had good answers, obviously they'd be bragging about them. But the truth is, we know that if you look at the history of these trade agreements, that we don't. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, the folks who propose the TPP are going to laud the profitability of certain corporations who have benefited from NAFTA. But what they're not going to talk about is the job impact, on the immigration impact, and a number of other very difficult impacts that have affected the livelihood and have contributed to income inequality and diminished economic opportunity for Americans, and which have led to 4 decades of flat wages. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and send it back to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And now I'd like to introduce Clyde Prestowitz. Clyde Prestowitz is very well known as one of our country's leading experts on the intersection between geopolitics and economics. He had a long and, some might say, difficult experience as a U.S. trade negotiator in Japan and Korea and China during the Reagan administration, and as president of the Economic Strategy Institute, brought that experience now to many books and professorships. And Clyde, take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you for kindly inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with the congresspersons. When the TPP was first raised as a possibility, I was among those consulted by the White House on what the objectives of the TPP should be. And I asked the officials in charge at the time what the real objective of the U.S. was. It's important to understand that the history of the TPP actually began in Singapore. And it was Singapore proposing a variety of free trade agreements in the South Pacific and Southwestern Pacific. And for a long time, the U.S. ignored these. But then a couple of years ago, the White House picked it up as a major objective. And so my question was, why? And the answer was not that we're going to create jobs for the United States, not that we're going to stimulate the U.S. economy, but that we're going to reassure our friends and allies in Asia that, quote, we're back. And this was to be in response to a complaint that had arisen in Southeast Asia that, gee, America had somehow gone away and had not been attending all the top conferences in Asia and so forth. However, because so the objective is really a geopolitical objective, not an economic objective, but because the mechanism to express this that we're back feeling is a trade agreement, it has to be then presented and sold as something that's going to create jobs in the U.S. and that's going to benefit the U.S. economy. So in my mind, there are two questions. One is, will a TPP, as we understand it at the moment, actually be a plus for the U.S. economy? And two, will it in any way affect our security position in the Pacific, in the world, and in some way strengthen that position? And I think the answer to both questions is no. In terms of the impact on the U.S. economy, we have to realize and remember that the two major factors that drive trade and that drive globalization are currency values and investment incentives and the question of competition policy. none of those three issues are covered by the TPP as it presently stands. I don't know whether to laugh or cry because U.S. negotiators have been negotiating long into the night with Japan on tariffs on pork and beef and rice, and talking about reducing these tariffs by some percentage point. And yet, we've seen that changes in currency values can wipe out in a few minutes any of the effects of tariff cuts. The investment incentives that are used by many countries to attract production that on a normal market cost basis would be done in the U.S. Competitively, but induces offshoring because of tax breaks, because of free land, because of free utility costs, and so forth. Those kinds of incentives are not at all a part of the negotiations, and yet they're much more powerful than tariffs in driving or determining trade flows. So I think that the net result here is an agreement that, like its predecessors, is very likely to end up with an increase in the U.S. trade deficit, with a net loss of U.S. jobs. And if that were going to buy greater security and somehow cement alliances, that might even possibly be a price worth paying. But it doesn't seem that it is going to change the alliance situation. We have the anomalous situation that we're proposing a TPP to strengthen alliances, and yet the Japanese and Korean prime ministers barely can talk to each other. The antagonism between Korea and Japan, or Japan and some of its other neighbors, goes back, of course, to long before World War II, and has not been resolved. It's not clear that they actually want this security arrangement as much as we do. And then that raises the question of what's the threat to the United States? The argument is that a deal like this will strengthen the alliance to counter China. But it's not clear why China has to be countered. China is not necessarily a threat to the U.S. So my bottom line is that it's not going to strengthen the security position of the U.S., and it's not going to improve the U.S. economy. It may, this is a very important point, it may be good for certain global companies that have their headquarters in the U.S., but what's good for global companies is not necessarily what's good for the American citizen and worker, and in this case, I think the net economic result would be negative for the U.S. So either the deal has to be improved or we shouldn't do it.
Thank you very much, Clyde Prestowitz. And we're going to open the call for questions, so start to queue up in just a minute. I will only add, and again, this is Lori Wallach from Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, I will only add to direct reporters' attention to a report we have recently published on the use of the foreign policy claims to sell trade agreements over the last 20 years. And what we have found is that when a trade agreement's sales job on the basis of the economic claim starts to falter, as certainly has happened for TPP in the United States, where the polling shows the majority of the public opposes it, and in Congress, in the House of Representatives, there is such a strong majority against fast track for TPP that the fast track bill was dead on arrival in Congress. And given that context, there's been a sudden shift over the last 3-4 months to foreign policy arguments. And the president's trip obviously is an enormous platform for that. So we looked at 20 years of these kinds of claims made to sell past trade agreements that were in trouble, the way TPP is in trouble in Congress and in the public here. And some of the findings were that, number one, as Clyde just said, the notion that somehow this set of rules is going to make the economic trends that are occurring change, and that is going to save certain markets for the U.S., is just empirically proved to be wrong and silly. And the data that's in there shows, for instance, how the 8 free trade agreements that the U.S. did between 2000 and 2011 with Latin America, which were sold as keeping, quote-unquote, Asia out of markets that were close to the Americas, totally flat that way. For instance, in that period, the pacts were all implemented, and China's exports to Latin America soared 1,300%. Or, for instance, and U.S. saw only modest export growth, or the U.S. share during that period of exports to Latin America dropped 36%, China's share increased 575%, et cetera, et cetera. Adding to this sort of silliness, also as far as the notion that this is somehow going to contain these Asian markets for the U.S. is a map of the existing or undergoing free trade agreements. China right now is negotiating a free trade agreement with Japan and Korea. There already are free trade agreements with China and many of the TPP partners, and or they see them as close allies. So the notion of somehow staking the economic corner with TPP is not true. Then there is the whole China containment issue, and the argument is peculiar in that, of course, China is invited, as are all Pacific Rim countries, to join TPP, as well as the fact that China either has or is negotiating trade agreements with other partners. And then there is this nasty-ish argument that has started to rise about the us or them argument to get the public off of thinking about what it would mean for their jobs. And that is the either we set the rules in Asia or China does argument, which basically just does an us or them fear-mongering argument to try and distract people, but it substitutes for our rules the TPP. And as Clyde has just laid out, many of those rules are actually against our national interest and would undermine our security. So with that, and the report is a long report which has literally 20 pages of quotes pulled directly from the congressional record, from the press, of all of these past agreements, and who said what exactly. If you substitute Japan for China, you have the very arguments being made today, and then what happened. And we take a lot of the current administration quotes and literally side-by-side them with the old ones, and it's one or two words change, same line. So with no further ado, let us go to questions. Online, you folks press calling in, you've gotten the instructions on how to take a question. Operator, let's have our first question.
Certainly. We'll go first to the site of William Malden from the Wall Street Journal. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for hosting this. Will Malden with the Wall Street Journal. Clyde, I was just wondering, as somebody who's been involved in negotiating with Japan before and seen the history of it, where do you think the U.S. is right now in the negotiation, and what do you think the short or medium-term outcome would be this year?
Well, I think it seems that they're in trouble. I mean, Mike Foreman U.S. Trade Rep was there last week, and I frankly expected that he would come away with the deal with Japan done, and it didn't happen. It seems that the agricultural interests in Japan are stubbornly fighting reduction of tariffs and more market opening in key agricultural sectors. And we, of course, have been pushing the Japanese on opening their automobile market now for about 30 years. I mean, as long as I've been in it, that's been one of the major issues. And that doesn't seem to be moving very well either. There are some last-minute discussions going on between Wendy Cutler, the deputy trade rep, and high-ranking Japanese, and there may yet come some last-minute deal, but like they're getting, not making the kind of progress I expected.
In Politico, just I guess it may have been things may have changed. Just said unlikely for the two sides to have anything for the leaders of the two countries to agree on. When next time when they get together. So
I think one of the
reinforced, I think, what Clyde was saying.
I jump back, and I think one of the things that's interesting is that the TPP really doesn't have much significance if Japan is not in it. And the issues that are being discussed, rice, beef, pork, automobiles, are old. It's deja vu. When I look at it, I think, my gosh, this discussion hasn't changed since 1980. And yet they're having trouble coming to some minimal arrangement on that, which is surprising at this late date, and suggests that, and I mean, even if these issues are resolved in some way, if they find a way to declare victory, they will not affect the economic relationship between the U.S. or trade or jobs in any significant way, except probably to increase the U.S. trade deficit.
And for reporters, this is Lori. Keep in touch with me by email. I'm actually heading to Japan and Korea right after this call to inquire about some of those very questions about what's going on, particularly in Japan with the negotiations, but also in Malaysia and other countries about all the other issues on TPP. They're not resolved even if the U.S. and Japan got their bilateral market access deal arranged. There's still a list of about 20 knockdown, drag-out issues that go to countries' fundamental interests, like Malaysia and the use of macroprudential regulations like capital controls. So stay tuned. I will be back on Monday, but will be available on email. Next question.
Certainly, and we'll go next to the site of Matt Rapik from TV Tokyo. Please go ahead.
Hey, thank you, everybody, for all of your, everything you've had to contribute here. I just have a question. We've been focused a lot on the TPP here and the provision of fast-track authority. I understand that this is a big trade agreement and that it would have a lot of influence on a very wide range of American interests, on workers, different sectors of the economy and business. What I'm wondering is, given so many different voices, so many different industries who would want their industries, treated preferentially in the negotiation, and given the incredible degree of congressional gridlock that we see these days, does anyone on this call actually think that if given the chance, Congress could review and successfully amend and successfully pass TPP legislation without the fast-track authority?
Well, the issue is that there is real, diversity, but the fact of the matter is that we have a constitutional authority to deal with trade agreements, and so many parts of that have been abdicated over the years. On the other hand, however, we did say several years ago that one of the integral parts of dealing with a trade promotion authority, this is Rosa DeLauro, was that what we would want, we laid out some principles, and the principles included oversight committee, principles included working with committees of jurisdiction, and all of the principles that were agreed to, have in fact none of them have come to pass. It's totally abrogated here. So you can make a determination that you could say you can't get agreement and so forth and so on, but there was never a process tried. It was bypassed totally, which is why there is so much opposition to trade promotion authority, and Congress not willing to go back to what was business as usual. And now there is a scrambling to try to engage with members of Congress. And as my colleague Mrs. Slaughter pointed out, and I had a very similar experience on the food safety side of the agreement, is you know, you cannot have staff. You have to, you know, review the piece of the document. Some is in bold, some is not. Bold is agreed to, it's not. Different issues on different pages. It is, you know, quite extraordinary for people who want to be conscientious and take a look at these efforts in order to move forward on trade issues. So to say that the Congress can't, you know, to do it, but just bypasses every effort or principle that was put into place to try to include and to incorporate congressional both oversight and input into the process.
Let me add one thing on to that. The fast-track bill the President's trying to get approval for has no Democrat sponsors. And we had at least 30 Republican members sign that they would not support fast-track. If there are no Democrats voting for it in the House and 30 Republicans voting against it, that's pretty impressive. But one of the biggest changes for us, I think, is the Senate Finance Committee chair. Replacing Max Baucus is now Ron Wyden of Oregon. And he is in no rush, as he said, to move fast-track through his committee, and both Minority Leader Pelosi and Harry Reid in the Senate have said that they're not keen on this fast track either. I frankly think that the White House basically knows this is over.
If I could just jump in, and I think that the question was, can Congress pass a deal with
the fast track bill? No.
My own view is that fast track has become kind of a stumbling block. It's almost the reverse. Fast track can't be passed unless there's an agreement to pass the deal. I think we're using the term fast track, but of course, you know, the official term is TPA, Trade Promotion Authority. And right there, the reach for the euphemism tells you that fast track is in trouble. They don't want to call it fast track. And I think the problem is that over the years, members of Congress have found that fast track authority has been used in ways that essentially slipped through things that were objectionable. And so now you can't get fast track unless an administration has essentially attained agreement to all the key elements of the deal. So as I said, it's kind of reversed. You have to be able to pass the deal before you can get fast track. I think fast track has become kind of more of an obstacle than a solution.
I also think that in that sense, and I don't know if you would agree, Clyde, it's not being able to get trade promotion authority, as has been, I think that is really what the facts are. It's just not there at the moment. But that also sends a signal to trading partners that then what they could potentially agree to can be, upended. And so that if we had looked at a trade promotion authority in what it can be and should be, that may be a different outcomes in terms of cooperation and collaboration to get us to a free trade agreement, as what you pointed out, that in fact is going to help the U.S. Economy, and that's what because the past has demonstrated that in fact those trade deals have not helped the U.S. economy or U.S. workers.
Good. Let me just interject there for a moment, because this, I think, a critical issue. We're really talking about the bill itself. Fast track will keep us from getting it, but not a single trade bill since I've been in Congress has been enforced. And that's one of the major things, is that the people who negotiate trade bills and wash their hands of it, basically. We need some changes in that, and we have sent a bill that I've been carrying for years to set up an authority in the United States that would absolutely make sure that those trade agreements are kept. And if they're not, we have what we call snapback, which would stop that trade agreement until they fix it. But it's really unseen barriers to trade that have kept us from having free trade or balanced trade with any of our partners. And not a single time except maybe a case going to the WTO, which languishes for years, has anything done about reinforcement?
Just to add, Mrs. Laurie, to add a little bit of data looking across the 20 years of trade agreements since NAFTA and WTO, the answer about whether one can get passed without fast track is basically when it's actually about trade per se, about cutting tariffs and lowering quotas, etc. There have been various pretty significant agreements that have been passed, like, for instance, there was a vote on the bilateral China WTO accession / removal of annual permanent normal trade relations review, which was a Donnybrook of a trade fight, but it was done under normal procedures. It was largely traditional trade matters that were at stake, and it passed. The place where fast track becomes necessary is when trade agreements have overreached into diplomatically legislating. That's what the history of it looks like. Because, for instance, the Clinton administration, which Congress voted down their fast track request in 1998 on the House floor, did about 100 agreements that were really tariff-lowering agreements that were honest-to-God trade agreements, and those did not require fast track. The TPP is so overreaching in all of its non-trade policy impositions that it's hard to imagine how an agreement like that would do without some kind of expedited procedure, particularly since the negotiators have ignored some of Congress's most direct orders. So one thing I wanted to just flag for all of the foreign reporters who are on from the Asian countries who the president is visiting, the U.S. constitutional authority for trade with Congress, that's why an agreement has to be approved. It's not like a parliamentary system where when the negotiator signs, it's as good as done. And Congress has been very explicit that there have to be enforceable currency disciplines against basically manipulating currency values to get an export benefit. And under the calculation that is being used in sort of the analysis of what that would involve, that would have Korea, Japan, and a bunch of other TPP partners as currency manipulators. And 60 U.S. senators, i.e. a veto override supermajority, and 230 House members sent letters to Congress saying they would not vote for TPP on fast track, off fast track, any TPP that didn't have these currency provisions. So to some degree the answer is yes. A trade agreement that's about trade could get passed without fast track. But an agreement that is way beyond trade and into imposing all kinds of policy decisions on the patents of medicines and immigration visas and financial regulation and food safety, and that doesn't have a variety of the key provisions Congress has said repeatedly in majority for years have to be included, would not look to be in good shape with fast track or without fast track, I would suspect, though I guess members of Congress, I'd be thrilled to be corrected.
Not by me.
It's not going to happen.
Right? May we have our next question, please?
Certainly. We'll go next to the site of Ellen Ferguson from Congressional Quarterly. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Thank you. This isn't a very complicated question. I mean, based on the speakers today, you all say TPP is dead. So I'm wondering why we're having this call.
We're having fast track is dead.
We said,
Well, but also from your comments, raising the number of issues that are still to resolve that several of you indicate are probably not resolvable, it seems like TPP is dead.
Ellen, this is Clyde. No, I don't think TP is dead, but I think that maybe it should be. And I think, that the administration is struggling to come up with something they can call victory. The president's going to Asia. They desperately want to have some kind of a deal that they can declare victory. And I've been here before when administrations get into the mode of we must declare victory. Typically, they agree to things that turn out not to be very good. But I don't think it's dead. I think that it's still being kept alive because it's become kind of a political high priority for the president for this trip. And that, in a way, is just the problem.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question, and then we're going to close our call.
And we'll take our final question from Don Lee at the LA Times. Please go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Congressman DeLauro, you mentioned that 2/3 of people were against fast track, and I wonder where you got that from. The Pew Research had a survey recently indicating that a majority of the public was actually in favor of free trade, with Democrats a little bit more than Republicans, in fact. And I wonder if you can comment on that. And quick question for Clyde. I mean, how much would American credibility and standing especially in Southeast Asia, be hurt if this falls apart? And they've been negotiating for 4 years, and you've talked about what what the administration is saying its interests are, but on the flip side, there has been a lot of criticism of American leadership, and people have been critical of TPP as well, and so I'm just wondering what the impact would be. Thanks.
Clyde, you want to go ahead?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I think, Don, that this issue of credibility, is always something that's rolled out. When an agreement's in trouble, then the issue of credibility is used as kind of a club to push it through. And I guess what interests me is that on the one hand, we hear from Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, that America, they want America to be back, so to speak, and that America needs to maintain its credibility. On the other hand, we don't get from those sources any specific agreements on security or trade issues that might put them in a position in which China would disapprove. So it seems to me that it's often a very much of a one-way rather than a bilateral street. And I think we could very well reverse the question and say, well, what about your credibility? Because we're having difficulty negotiating an agreement on trade and investment and globalization that is, really a win-win deal. And yet our trading partners are suggesting that if we don't go for a deal that is suboptimal, that somehow our credibility is in question. So I think in a way it's kind of a false issue. Let me just say one other thing, which is that the things that we're negotiating are, one, really much of it is not trade. Much of it is investment. Much of it is administrative, and it's stuff which may facilitate the operations of certain global companies, but is not going to have much effect on the U.S., much positive effect on the U.S., perhaps negative effect on the U.S. And as I said earlier, the main drivers of globalization and trade are not being addressed by the deal. And so, again, it's hard for me to see how credibility is on the line.
Thank you very much, Clyde. Thank you to all three members of Congress and everyone who participated.
Lori,
Yes, ma'am.
Lori, this is Rosa, because the gentleman asked a question. I just wanted to add something to what Clyde said, and it may be with regard to what we were talking about before with the TPP. It may be that TPP is, won't move forward without any addressing of the currency issue. So I just want to put that point on it. I think what I would just say is that, and we can get you the citation for, what the data that I was using, and maybe when you ask the American public about free trade, I think that there is, there's an interest in saying, you know, that they're supportive of that effort. But if you begin to parse that and talk about NAFTA, and you talk about more particulars, people understand what the results of that is, and it changes. I have to take a look at the questions. Also, you take a look at the questions that were done with the Business Roundtable, and you know, and see what that produces. But overall, there is a when you don't push on your questions or bias your questions, and you just talk about these agreements, the American people have a very high understanding of what happens to them with regard to, particularly to NAFTA.
Thank you very much for that important final note. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the call. A recording of the call will be available at tradewatch.org, and also we will have a transcript later in the day. The tradewatch.org posting, we will have it on the front page when you go right to tradewatch.org. That's also where you can find the Foreign Policy Report. Many thanks to our members of Congress and to Clyde Prestowitz. And also on the advisory is contact information for all the members of Congress. But if you need that information, please also feel free to contact Sarah Leonardo at Rosa DeLauro's office, Eric Walker at Congresswoman Slaughter's office, and Ira at Fenton.com for an overview of all of it. And for Congressman Ellison's office, contact, oh my God, I'm having a contact, I'm forgetting who. Ask Sarah at Congressman DeLauro's office. Sorry, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for your participation in today's conference call. Please feel free to disconnect at any time. 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 At any time.